particularly among civil society organizations and NGOs operating on the ground with local governments, there is quite a very strong upwelling of interest on their part and in actually getting things moving. There are projects underway in various parts of Brazil. We have now tabulated with the group that's involved in this project about 30 projects of some kind of scale with different local organizations at different scales. Either they can be up to the state level of working on a whole state as a focus of REDD, or working on just a municipality or a local government area or an indigenous reserve. So we have very different scales and very different types of projects, some of which are private projects, some of them are driven by state governments, but they're basically focused on localities and on sub-state areas. The federal government does not have, except for its channeling of resources from the donation from Norway through the National Development Bank, there's no REDD investment going on from the federal level. There's a number of projects in the state of Amazonas where the program of the Bolsa Floresta, the forest payments to community members who are living inside of sustainable development reserves, has been going on already since 2009. So there's another different nomenclatures. Some of them are considering themselves as being the state's REDD pilots, and some of them have another name but are adhering to the same approach or philosophy of dealing with, in an integrated way, with the problems that affect causing deforestation and working out ways to get around it. The principal deforestation concern that afflicts Brazil and the rest of the world about Brazil is the Amazon. So the attention is all focused on how fast is the Amazon being taken down. And a lot of that concern has to do with the fact that there's a very highly undefined status of tenure, of land tenure in the Amazon. You have a large proportion of the Amazon is actually untitled land. It's nominally belongs to the state, to the federal or state governments, and there is a process going on of trying to regularize land tenure. But contracts, for example, between land occupants who are irregular occupants of land and those who might be interested, whether from a national level or international level, in investing in payments or any other kind of mechanism for REDD Plus would have to be adjusted to reflect the fact that the tenure situation is still very much undefined. So that's one characteristic that I think we have to take into account when we're thinking about preparing for REDD Plus. So a good part of the resources that have come into Brazil for REDD through the Amazon Fund that was created in the National Development Bank, resources from Norway, have gone to helping states and local governments try to deal with this undefined status of land tenure. So that's, I think, a first step that is being taken, and it's very important to ready Brazil for other kinds of more advanced aspects of REDD. I think that there's progress being made on both the land tenure aspect, having a greater proportion of land being titled over the last few years than there had been before, but also joining with the land titling process, the environmental licensing of property, so that you have a you can state whether a given property is in abidance with the national codes having to do with land use, and that is going a process is going along also. But I would say that this process is very slow, and much slower than it should be if we're going to make significant progress in the near term to reducing deforestation. A lot of the attention over the past year since Copenhagen in Brazil has focused not so much on REDD per se, but on the debate in Brazilian society over the Forest Code, which is the code which regulates land use in Brazil, which affects the Amazon and affects also all other areas of Brazil in terms of the proportion of private lands, of titled lands, that must be dedicated to protected regimes. And this is a debate that is pitting agribusiness interests and landowners against environmental interests. And there's very little of an end in sight in terms of coming to a conciliatory agreement between these very different actors in terms of their perspectives on what should be the desirable structure of land management in Brazil. So we see, for example, in our media study, until there's considerable attention to REDD in the leading up to Copenhagen, but after that we've seen very little attention to REDD in the press, and the attention has also drifted a bit away from moving forward in regulating the structure, the governance structure of REDD at the federal level, and more focusing on resolving this conflict over the land code, or the forest code. So I think that this is an issue that really dominates the discussion in Brazil, and that until that is resolved, we're not going to see major progress on REDD. Well, I think that they are, for having advanced so far in terms of the number of projects that have been actually put into place or getting started in design, and having discussed, at least among different groups of society, what it means to resolve the deforestation problem. There can be some lessons learned that would be of use to other countries. On the other hand, there aren't that many countries that have the same kind of federalist structure. I think in many cases there are very different kinds of baseline political frameworks and social frameworks that are really not transferable. So I think there can be things that are learned in a more technical basis from what Brazil has done in terms of developing its MRV capacity to monitor and to verify the advances in reducing deforestation. But Brazil has its own problems in making that kind of knowledge useful for on-the-ground enforcement on the part of the police powers. So you can have really very sophisticated tools for gauging how much deforestation is out there and how effective your instruments have been to reduce deforestation. But if you don't have the ability to get down to the property level and say whether that a specific person is actually adhering to a given agreement, you really don't have much to stand on. Gets back to what we were talking about regarding the Forest Code. The Forest Code has existed since 1965 in Brazil. And since 1997 in the Amazon, by law, you are not allowed to clear more than 20% of a given property. But how many property owners have actually observed this, and to what degree has it been possible for the state governments who are responsible for the enforcement of this law to make sure that those property owners are abiding by that when there isn't necessarily a really completely clear tenure structure. You don't know where the property boundaries are, and you can't really see those from the air or from a satellite image. So if you don't have some kind of system, the licensing system that we mentioned is one step in that direction, where you have information on an individual property basis as to what are the property boundaries, where are the areas that are designated by that property owner to be protected in forest, remain in forest, and where are the areas that can be used for agriculture, and that you can year after year go back to the same satellite image where you have those borders drawn out as to how land is to be used on an individual property level, and say, well, he's going over the line here. We better get out there and see what's going on. Maybe he's had a forest fire or something, and we need to get out there and see how we can restore the land that was supposed to be in a protected area. But then you have to have then the resources to get out there. Let's say, we can sit in Cuiabá, in the state capital of Mato Grosso, and say, well, we know where the guys are deforesting that's beyond the boundaries of where they're supposed to be, but we don't have gasoline to get out there, or we don't have a helicopter, or we don't have bullets for our guns to chase after the the criminals who are out there. And we also don't have the authority to make the fines that we mete out against those who are infracting to really stick. So we have maybe 2%, 5% maximum payment of fines, of environmental fines in Brazil. Fines are just treated as something that you put in the court, and it could be going on for decades before you could actually force somebody to pay a fine. So the fines in themselves have not been an effective deterrent to deforestation. There's something like 2 billion reais or dollars of unpaid fines out there that are just not they're not serving as a deterrent. The question, I think, before REDD+ is really a question of whether you want it to be derived mostly from enforcement or from the stick and the carrot at the same time, what's the mix there. And in Brazil, we have a tradition in our environmental management of being command and control oriented. So although it's not very effective on its own, in actually assuring that you have adherence to the code. So if we can combine enforcement with some kind of incentive measures, or lack of making it more difficult to get access to the kinds of incentives that people are interested in, then I think it can be much more effective. So we're really talking about what we're starting to call a policy mix. It's a mixture of different instruments, both command and control and economic incentives and economic instruments themselves, including payments, that can be more effective against dealing with deforestation. And there has been a move in the judiciary to be much more stringent about the law and to also apply other kinds of incentives that go beyond just the fine that could be left in the courts for ages. So that if you can link the fact that somebody has been charged with an infraction to their accessibility to credit, that can be an effective deterrent. So that is one tool that the judiciary has now begun to use, and fairly effectively, to jointly with the National Monetary Council, in fact, decided a couple of years back that those who are are not in accordance with the environmental codes should not be allowed to take out credit There's a mix of opinions about that. The government has been crowing success in saying that its command and control strategy is paying off, and that there's just the fright of not being able to access credit and not being okay with the powers that be has made people reduce the rate of opening up new frontier areas. There are others in the NGO community who analyze the relationship between deforestation and the price of commodities, who say, well, this is very closely linked with commodity prices, and commodity prices have gone down during the financial crisis, so the minute they go back up again, it will be deforestation, just business as usual. And that really hasn't happened, and Brazil has not really had a serious economic depression of any kind. It was maybe the first semester of 2009 was a serious period that was kind of negative in terms of economic downturn, but Brazil has been growing at like 5% since then, and the deforestation rates still go down. So maybe there is something to be said for the command and control strategy on its own having been effective.